Welcome to CAM Radio, an ahead of the curve initiative by Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, bringing you every Friday the latest in legal and policy. Stay tuned, enjoy listening. CSR, philanthropy, giving. What big words and beautiful words these are. We use them in daily life. Today, CAM Radio is really pleased to present a man as our guest speaker who has walked the talk on these topics. Amit Chandra. He needs no introduction. In conversation with our managing partner, Cyril Shroff. This conversation is moderated by Rishabh Shroff. I, at least, am really looking forward to this conversation.
Look, I think there will always in society be competing needs for capital. And those competing needs will arise from either what provides a person personal satisfaction or sometimes what a person believes they need because society puts a value to who they are. Okay. And so when it comes to wealth, what kind of size of house I stay in, what kind of car I drive, do I have a private plane or I don't have a private plane? Do I have a second or a third house in a particular location? And unfortunately, sometimes these become a treadmill of never-ending requirements because, and when I say treadmill, it's basically, you walk it and it keeps expanding because it starts with a particular size of house and goes to a different size of house. And, Cyril will bear with me that what we thought was acceptable in the 90s changed dramatically to 2000 and is very different today for the same strata of society, by the way. And and then if you look at the same strata of society and you look at what their giving is, the giving has not necessarily moved with the same aspiration as, let's say, what they are spending on anything material is. So the question is that what will it take to change that? Okay, I think what it will take to change that is only, in my mind, two things. One is people will change if either they believe society puts a premium on it, or they will change if they get personal satisfaction of doing something. Okay, I believe that the first one, giving needs to basically is basically the point that giving needs to become sexy, right? At some point of time, we need society to start thinking that, look, if you have wealth, then your responsibility is to contribute towards building society as much as maybe you want to basically celebrate that wealth through investing in yourself. I think the moment people start feeling that they're going to be, for lack of a better word, judged that way, I think people will automatically start making those choices, right? I do believe at some point of time, if you look at in history, across history, not just independent India as history, I think people, wealth creators invested in society, be it building schools or hospitals or other institutions, because they believed that, people around them looked at them with that lens. So I think the moment at this point of time, I think what's happening is people believe that they're being judged more by the display of wealth as opposed to by the kind of things that they're doing with it, which are societal in nature. And so I think people are just responding, therefore, to what society they believe cares about. The second part of it, Rishabh, is a little bit more self-actualization. What does it take for an individual to feel that their sense of purpose is more, caring for somebody else, is That, it's more building empathy in themselves. I think that is a very personal journey. I don't think, you can really, I don't know how you can build a more empathetic society per se. Different people, it happens to them, and it's a set of experiences that they go through. Sometimes you're exposed to a guru who teaches you that. Sometimes you read a book and you learn that. Sometimes, there's a life-changing experience that you go through, which makes you think about that. And so it's very difficult in my mind to be able to, and sometimes it's actually ingrained in your DNA. Your parents just tell you and teach you that, look, you'll reach a phase in your life where you have to think about what is enough. And you start thinking that way, right? And so I don't have a good answer, a stock answer for what will it take for...
There is no stock answer. So
there is no stock answer. And, I think, but I can tell you one thing, that it's interesting. I am seeing a generational shift where the younger generation, and I don't know why that is the case, does think about society very differently from my generation. And they do think that, if they are, they're definitely less selfish about themselves than we were. And I think that gives me hope. Because our generation did the most damage, for example, to the environment than probably any other generation did in a 1 million years, right? That's what evidence shows us, that if you look at how much destruction of flora, fauna probably happened in a 50, 60-year period. And so I think your generation, the generation just after you, thinks very differently about these things. They are more responsible about things. So I do have hope that there's something happened. Now, why has that happened? What's shaping that? I'm not an anthropologist or a sociologist. I don't really understand what's shaping those things. But I think at the individual level, some people clearly at some point of time just break out and start thinking very differently.
No, I agree with you.
One more point to what you just said, Amit, and I think there is a sort of a role for the icons of the day. So a lot of philanthropy happened during Gandhiji's time.
Yes.
And when you see your kind of national idol or national leader to be essentially believing in the trusteeship concept, and your relationship with wealth is of a particular nature. If you see some of the big philanthropies, they all happened under, I would say, broad spiritual leadership of Gandhiji. And
I think, Cyril, I think you make a great point. And this is the point I was making, that sometimes there are things that inspire you, which you don't know how, and it's very tough to predict that. I mean, like in Archana, in my case, it was a person, Chuck Feeney, whose money ultimately became General Atlantic Partners. Not many people know about him, but he gave away 99.9% of his wealth during his lifetime. And he became such an inspirational figure for us when we really found out how and why he did what he did. But sometimes just exposure to, and also it was the teachings of Guru Nanak, which inspired us enormously. But I don't know, how do you systematize that? It's these things are almost random, because all of us are exposed to something or the other which is inspirational on almost a weekly basis. But what sticks and how it will impact us is, I don't know what the science behind that is.
Who is giving back to society? You mentioned sort of we need to make giving back sexy, which is exactly what Nikhil Kamath also said. And I quote him exactly. If you make giving money away cool, a lot more will change in society. And we're really seeing this trend play out across both corporate India and the startup ecosystem as well. A lot of wealth creation is happening in the tech ecosystem. Startup founders who've cashed out, sitting on a lot of money, who want to give back to their city, their society, their community, etc. So we are seeing a lot of new structures, a lot of new involvement, a lot of new checks and issues coming from, I would say, the 30 to 45, 46-year-olds, who are, like you rightly said, solving the problems that your generation has created for them. Issues about, climate change, issues about inequality in society, etc. So when you talk to, companies that, for example, you invest in, companies you advise, both in the startup space and sort of India's next gen in the corporate world as well, do you see this trend really playing out? Are you seeing more next gen getting involved in this some conversation? And do you see people actually taking action? I think one thing you mentioned earlier as well, a lot of the next gen want to have a compelling narrative, a compelling story. It's not about a checkbook philanthropy for them. It's actually about who they're giving back to, what's the story, what's the human connection they have with them. Are they solving something for their grandkids in the future? So it's a very deeply personal thing they're doing. It may be implemented through a checkbook or philanthropy kind of receipt, but for them it's actually saving the world literally. So do you see this playing out in your conversation talking to corporate India and the startup space?
Yeah, no, Rishabh, absolutely. And I can tell you that maybe we should do some a database analysis of this, but I can certainly tell you anecdotally from all the things that I'm involved with, and that there's a fair breadth of things I'm involved with, that the two biggest mega trends that I am seeing at this point of time is on entrepreneurs who have basically made a reasonable amount of wealth are giving away disproportionate parts of their wealth, and that's definitely a mega trend. And the second is professionals, across industries. But there are a couple of industries where you see that concentration because the wealth effect may be slightly higher, are giving away disproportionate parts of their wealth. Now, these are definitely mega trends. I see this in institutions that I've been involved in building, and I think I feel really encouraged by that. You talked about Nikhil Kamath. I can tell you Ashish Dhawan, Sanjeev Bikhchandani are, again, great examples of this. But there are literally...
I'm saying even people in their early 30s today are doing exactly what
absolutely.
you said.
But, we sometimes only look at the early 30 ones. I would also look at people all the way up to their 50s and 60s in some cases who are actually made money. I mean, the Bakshi family, for example, Sumrata Bakshi, has written big checks. A disproportionate part of his wealth has gone, into philanthropy. Chris Gopalakrishnan, Shibu Lal, Mr. Nayak, A.M. Nayak, Cyril and I work closely with him, has been an extraordinary, donor. And these are examples of, while Mr. Nayak is an example of a professional, Ashish Dhawan, Sanjeev Bikhchandani, examples of professionals. Subrata Bakshi is an example of a, entrepreneur. Ashok Trivedi, after selling iGate, great example of someone who's given away a large part of his wealth, very quietly. So there are both examples in my mind. I mean, and you're right. I mean, the interesting thing about some of the entrepreneurs, you find really young guys because the wealth came to them quickly, but you also find older guys. In professionals, you find them typically in the bracket of 40 to 50, 40 to 50, 55. But entrepreneurs, you find them, in a broader age spectrum.
The one thing which I really like about the next gen getting involved is willing to experiment with more structures and kind of more ways of giving back. When this whole news about the Patagonia founder, the clothing chain in the US, which sort of makes environmental friendly clothing, the founder, I think Mr. Chouinard, he kind of moved his entire kind of corporate structure into a non-profit trust, about $3-4 billion worth of just holdings by itself. A lot of people asked, why can't we have the same thing in India? Why can't my startup be held in a non-profit or my operating company held in a non-profit? So, and ultimately, Indian laws don't allow that. So I think the institutional framework to enable all this also needs to be kind of...
that is, Rishabh, you make a very important point. Cyril touched upon this right at the beginning. I think tax incentives are a very sensitive issue, and the government in general seems to be moving towards taking away tax incentives, right? I mean, as a way of spurring giving. Or actually tax incentives in general. The government's view is that, let's just simplify the tax code. But the one thing that I think is worth thinking about is how do we treat the giving of shares to a charitable structure? I think this one issue has to be thought about more deeply by the government, okay? Because that certainly causes problems. Now, Currently, if Cyril can, or even Rishabh, you can basically correct me. I think there you can give it away, but you have to sell it within a very short period of time. I think what you need is a much longer calibrated disposal period, which is practical. So that, because the counter to that is that essentially otherwise, even in the US, those have become tax avoidance structures and ways to protect estates. And you don't want that. But I think you need a middle ground which will encourage charitable giving and yet allow people who have genuine desire to give to actually put large parts of their wealth into a charitable structure. I mean, look at what the Tatas were able to do and the Godrej family was able to do. I mean, those structures have survived and were genuine, well-meaning structure. They've survived now in one case over a century, right? So I think we need something like that.
This is where the cynical lawyer in me says that a lot of these US structures came because of 40%, estate duty in the US, and these structures actually meant to shield that money from going to government and actually for your control and for use only through these sort of complex charities. But
it did. I think it did. You're absolutely right. But that's why I think we need to learn from what has happened in the US, and we need to implement a version of it with a checks and balance.
No, I agree. And I think the trigger for this in India most likely will come, suppose estate duty comes back into force in India. We abolished ours in 1985 or 86 at a top rate of 85%. So if and when that comes, suppose the government changes and this comes back, I think that will trigger a conversation about what structures can be used to defer or sort of get rid of taxation, demands in this context. So I think it's a two-part conversation. It's not maybe as simple as saying that, how can we have charitable structures owning for-profit companies? So I think maybe on that thoughtful note, I want to say thank you to both of you for your very candid remarks. I think at least for me, a lot of food for thought about, for example, this SEBI initiative about what can be on a social stock exchange, how to get the next gen more involved in philanthropy in India, and what more we can do. Maybe as one last question and maybe a sentence or two from both of you. If we have the same conversation, let's say 2 years from right now, about how philanthropy has moved in India, this cycle's one election cycle, this cycle's, I think, at least 2 or 3 full financial years after the pandemic as well. So what would success in Indian personal philanthropy look like for you 2 years from now?
Cyril, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
No, I think it's both a quantitative and a qualitative answer. I think quantity much more, and qualitatively very focused around different themes and where it will make a real difference to a large part of India which needs assistance. I think
I think Cyril teed it up well. I think it's both about the how and how much. On the how much, if you were to take a 2-year period, look, I personally believe that wealth will increase at some double-digit rate, maybe low double-digit, 10-15%. So let's say 2 years from now, people are wealthier by 30% when you compound that number. I would say it would be a shame if giving hasn't increased by twice that, because we have underpenetration at this point of time, right? So we should really feel happy if, giving amongst the wealthy and ultra wealthy has gone up by 50% in a 2-year period. And then we can say that we have done a good job. So that's the answer to, how much. On the how, I would love to see a few things change. One is I would love to see people engage more with the government. Because that's how we will really inform better policy. I would love to see people collaborate a lot more with each other as opposed to try to do their own thing, because a lot of this is about learning. I mean, the amount I've learned working with Cyril, I would never have learned, just sitting and trying to do my own thing, right? And this is same about social change. If you collaborate with others, every project that we do is a collaborative. So I think people need to build collaboratives in areas that they are passionate about. So I would love to see more, collaborators. I'd love to see people do things beyond their backyard.
Yep.
If you look at the data on where giving happens, it typically happens a lot in a few circles in a very concentrated way. But most of India's extreme poverty is in what's called aspirational districts. And those get very little of our money. So I would love to see people travel to the interiors of, the country and try to give there and understand. That will also build their understanding of India. So I would love to see that happen as well. And finally, I would love to see people give to non-standard causes. Everybody gives to education and health.
1000%. Very few give to climate action and climate change.
So I would love people to think about, the world is about so many other things, right? So choose something where, you're passionate about, which is, of course, all these other things are seminal and important, but also choose something else, because society, I imagine, I enjoy so many meals with Cyril. And the good thing about a good meal is that it requires a whole lot of masalas and herbs. You can't only have chili and salt. It's the same thing about society. We can't just be focusing on education and health. If we want a balanced, holistic development, we have to think about gender issues. We have to think about, intellectual disabilities. We have to think about, climate change. We have to think about so many other things that we need to think about. And so I think I would love to see that widen.
No, thank you. I 1000% endorse what you said, and the music to my ears, what you hope that giving goes up by 50% in 2 years. So I hope and pray that comes true. So on that very happy note, let me say thank you to both of you, and look forward to having both of you back in a future podcast very soon about how we are on these things that we spoke about. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amit.